The Civil Rights Act of 1964. Ron Paul said, and I quote, "The Civil Rights Act of 1964 did not improve race relations or enhance freedom." Now, I agree with him. I agree with him at 100%. Now, let's be clear about this. Ron Paul does not reject every part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He's against certain part of the Civil Rights Act. And we are going to go over that. Now, I'm talking about this because, first of all, I like controversial issues. And then number two, the Democrats are trying to use race against Ron Paul. They're trying to say, well, he doesn't like black people. He's racist, basically, because of some newsletters, because he did not support the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and also because he voted against Martin Luther King holiday. Now, we're going to come back to that. Now, let's go back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Which part did Ron Paul does not agree with? The part that he has explained many times about is private property. Now, back then you had some white people who were racist and basically didn't want black people in their private restaurants. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 said, well, you can't ban people, certain type of people, from your restaurant. That you have to accept everybody. Now, that's the part that Ron Paul is saying that is wrong. And I agree with him on that. How can you force somebody to accept anybody into his private property? It's like saying that you have a house and the government is telling you that you have to absolutely accept anybody in your house. Now, this is talking about freedom. That is taking people's freedom away. Now, if you're talking about public property, like, for example, parks, the parks and stuff like that, yeah, of course, public bathrooms. Of course, you can deny some people or black people to access to public bathroom. That is the property of the government. But we are talking about private restaurant. If I am racist, for example, and I decide in my restaurant that I don't want no white people, the government shouldn't force me to accept white people in my restaurant. It is my private restaurant. It's like my private home. That is freedom. It doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that racism is right. It doesn't mean that you are endorsing racism. No, that is just freedom. People should be free to choose who they want. As long as you don't hurt somebody, you should be free to be racist if you want to. Yes, I said it. The government's job is not to try to change people's mind or make people good people. That's not what the government is supposed to be doing. The government should make sure that people are free and that they can prevent crimes. That is the job of the government, not to force people to accept some type of people in private property. That is the part that Ron Paul was against. And the Democrats understand this very well. Now, let me tell you what I think about this civil rights, what I think about that specific part about the civil rights of 1964. I think that, yes, it did enhance race relations, and also it made us black people lazy. Yes, it did. Because we are now depending on other people's restaurant. I think what the government should have done is to tell black people, hey, listen, this is people's private property. And we cannot force them to allow you in their private property. But what you can do is to open your own restaurant. And to also accept the people that you want to accept in your own restaurant. I think if the government would have done that, explain clearly a difference between private property and public properties, I think we black people, African American, would have been more prosperous. Because you know what? We would have opened our own restaurant. And he would have started a competition. We would have competed. And those who made the decision at the time not to allow black people in their restaurant would have regretted. Because black people would have invested their money in their own restaurant. It would have given them the courage to go out there and to fight for themselves, not to depend on other people's restaurant. Now look at us. Look at black people. Look at African Americans. We spend a lot of money in these restaurants, especially fast foods and stuff like that. Now imagine yourself that those restaurants were black people's restaurants. Black people would have been more prospered. I'm going to give you an example. Black people were not allowed to sit in front of buses. They had to sit in the back of the buses. Now, Rosa Parks was tired and she decided, you know what, I'm tired of sitting in the back of the bus. I'm going to sit right here. That right there started a pretty good conversation. Black people decided that, you know what, if you are not going to allow us to sit wherever we want to sit in buses, we're not taking the buses anymore. Black people took a really good decision and said, we can no longer accept to sit in the back of the buses and be considered as second-class citizens. So for a while, they didn't take any buses, and they marched, and they helped each other. And that was a good thing, because that started the conversation that brought us to where we are. So if black people had understood that, you know what, we can do this even with restaurants. They don't want us in their restaurant, that's fine. Let's go and open our own restaurants. This would have brought a very good competition. Endorsing freedom does not mean that you endorse everything about freedom. People's choices are people's choices. The reality is that you cannot stop racism. How do you know if somebody is racist or not? Because he put a sign out and say, well, I don't want black people in my restaurant. Yes, some people are bold enough to do that, but some people just don't express their feelings. In fact, things like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 hurt black people more than it hurts anybody else. One thing that the government did that is very successful, because everything that the government is doing is actually a failure. The economy is a failure. Foreign policy is a failure. Education is a failure. Every single thing the government does is a failure. But one thing that they did very successful, they've been very successful at doing, is to divide people. They divided us very well to their liking. Because when you look around you, what do you see? Gay rights, black rights, women's rights, religious rights. You have all sort of groups, Latinos' rights, every type of groups around you. The only people that I don't see with any rights is white people's rights. I haven't heard of any white male's right. Everybody's fighting everybody. They've been very successful at doing things like that. You have groups where Christians and Muslims hate each other. Straight and gay don't like each other. Latinos don't like blacks, and all type of different groups. And the reason for that was so that when the government mess up, we don't get together and whoop them. That is why they did what they did. That is exactly, what is going on now is exactly what they wanted. They wanted us to be divided and form groups. You go to the Congress, they got a black caucus. What the hell is the black caucus? What are they supposed to be doing? Helping black people only? This is ridiculous. So Democrats are saying that Ron Paul is racist because he's for freedom. You can't criticize Barack Obama because he's black. So Barack Obama can do everything that he wants to do, and nobody can criticize him because he's black. And you know they did that in 2008. Well, if you don't vote for Obama, you're racist. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. And people fell into this too. A lot of white people really felt like, well, if we don't vote for Obama, we may be considered racist. But that's ridiculous. You should be able to do what you want to do. And the truth is that if you want to be racist, that is your business. It shouldn't be anybody else's business. I think each one of us should mind our own business as long as we don't hurt anybody physically. I said it again. It doesn't mean that we are endorsing everything about liberty. But that's what freedom is all about. Let people do what they want to do. One of the other subjects they came up with is Ron Paul voted against Martin Luther King's holiday. If there is one person who is very similar to Martin Luther King in his speeches, it's Ron Paul. Martin Luther King and Ron Paul are saying the same thing. They both have one guilt. They carry one message. If you want to go back into listening to Martin Luther King's speeches, you will realize that they are saying the same thing. They both talk about freedom, and they both talk about treating everybody the same way. Martin Luther King did not say that we should treat black people better than white people or better than any other race. Martin Luther King many times